Welcome. What is Titan? A no-code platform for Salesforce. What can you do with Titan? You can build forms, portals, document generation, e-signatures, maps, automation, and a lot more. Security is really important to us. Therefore, we are HIPAA compliant, PCI SSC compliant, GDPR 508, and ISO compliant. So, what are you waiting for? Schedule a demo with us at Form Titan and let us build the impossible for Salesforce.
We were just a bunch of nerdy kids who ignored the haters. We took their ridicule and we built on it. And when some of us gave up, well, we built on that too. Built resilience, built on a mission to make things a little better every day until the users came. Then the haters were VCs who scoffed at our audacity. This just isn't the way things are done. But we kept building. Users turned into teams, turned into companies, running their entire businesses on our apps. Then the software giants came after us. We weren't proven, we weren't fully featured, our radical cloud model wasn't secure. But we built on. And today, as companies adopt the cloud to move faster, teams are finding themselves slowed down by each other's efforts. The skeptics are claiming we'll never develop innovation at scale. But now, DevOps have come to the cloud, ushering in a new era of transformation. Companies can release on demand across hundreds of environments, innovating faster with fewer conflicts and fewer disruptions. There will always be challenges. There will always be naysayers. And we'll build on.
Good afternoon to everyone joining from India. Good evening, good morning, or maybe still good night to people joining us around the globe today. Welcome to today's session on how to access Salesforce data from Lightning Web Components open source. Okay, so about me, so already Rupesh has introduced me. My name is Aditya. I work as a senior developer evangelist at Salesforce. I primarily work with the APAC region, so all of my sessions and all you'll find it in APAC friendly time zones. You can follow me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about the platform, about development. Just a small request, don't send me code snippets. I won't be able to debug issues right there on LinkedIn or Twitter. But yeah, you can definitely reach out to me for anything else. And even if you want to play Ludo King, I'm available on Twitter. You can just ping me the room ID and I'll join. I'm currently 13x certified. I didn't put all the logos because there was no space, but yeah, reach out to me. Let's have meaningful conversations. Let's get your doubts clarified. And a big shout out again to all the sponsors without whom this event cannot happen, because in the end, there is money involved and these are involved in giving us the money. So yes, a big shout out to all of these. And also our nonprofit charity partners and Mercy Corps. In this time of uncertainty, we'll have to make sure we support everybody else who needs our help. And all of these have been focusing on that, all of these companies. So let's all do our best to help others during these times. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start with the forward-looking statement, which says that don't make your purchasing decisions based on anything I might say today. Please base it off on generally available features. That is what the statement says. With that, let's quickly jump into today's agenda. So today we are going to look at what is Lightning Web Components open source, or in short, we call it LWC OSS. Then we are going to look at how you integrate Salesforce with it. And we'll look at architecture, authentication options, data residency options. And in between all of these, there are going to be code walkthroughs. And finally, we'll wrap it up with some best practices. So coming to Lightning Web Components open source, I hope all of you or most of you who are joining me today already know about Lightning Web Components. So in case you don't know about it, it is our modern UI framework, which is completely based on web standards. And on the Salesforce platform, you use this framework. And on top of the framework, we have built these layers. That is your base Lightning components or Salesforce specific features like bindings. So for example, if you want to call an Apex method inside Salesforce using Lightning Web Components, you can just write @salesforce/apex/classname.methodname. or static resource or schema. So there are many Salesforce related bindings that we have added on top of the framework when you're using the framework on Salesforce. But the Lightning Web Components framework as such is a very lightweight, thin framework that is completely based on modern web standards. And what we have done, we have open sourced that framework. So whatever is the huge blue green line that you see, that is just the framework part, none of the Salesforce related features, but just the core framework is what we open sourced. And what that is going to help you do is you can now use the same framework to build apps on any other platform and not just Salesforce. So for example, you built a Lightning Web Component right now and you are deploying it on Salesforce. With the open source version, you can also deploy the same web component onto any other platform, and all the platforms are listed down there. And that is the major thing, that is use the same framework on and off the platform. Now, because it is open source, what you can also do is you can explore the source code. So the entire source code behind Lightning Web Components is completely available to you for free. So you can go through that, look at how we have implemented things internally. And most of all, you can learn from it, and you can also contribute back to us. So in case right now you think that there is some feature that you have in mind that would benefit the Lightning Web Components framework altogether, you can definitely submit that to us, and the instructions for that is given in that small hyperlink over there, rfcs.lwc.dev. So there is a bit of a process for you to submit your ideas to us. It's not just ideas, but you submit the source code as well. But yeah, that is all about web components open source. Use the same framework on and off the platform. We'll look into the demos and all in just a bit. Now, what you can do with the open source version. So all of you working on Salesforce, you might be using development tools like VS Code. You have your own CI/CD implementations, everything which is, some of it is external to Salesforce. With the open source version, you can use all of the open source broader community. So for example, right now, you don't really build anything on Salesforce, right? I mean, code build doesn't happen at your end. You deploy the code to Salesforce, code gets compiled over there and it runs. But with the open source version, you can feel free to use any tools of your choice to build. So when I say build, it doesn't mean constructing build, but it means compiling the code. That can happen using any of the open source tools like Webpack or Redis. And for testing, all of you know that we are using the Jest framework in order to write your test classes or scripts for Lightning Web Components. For code quality as well, there are certain tools. Coming to the last two sections, deployment, already we spoke about being able to deploy it onto any platform. So for example, you can deploy it onto Heroku, AWS, and you can also use open source tools like Circle CI or GitHub Actions in order to do your CI/CD implementation. And finally, coming to data, of course, like I said, the framework is not tied to Salesforce. So you can use any data source of your choice. So your data really needed come from Salesforce. It can come from, let's say, a Postgres database. Or if you have a local database, you can surface data from that as well using Lightning Web Components. So that is at a very high level, the description of Lightning Web Components. So the best way that you can start exploring it is by going to this website, pretty easy to remember, lwc.dev. This website is for the open source version of it. And what it contains is basic information on how to get started and all of it. You can go to the guide, which is pretty much your documentation about Lightning Web Components. And what you can see is all of the things that you're already familiar with, like CSS, reactivity, that means using @track or @API. How do you fire events? What is a component lifecycle, third-party libraries, all of it. But what you notice is missing from here is the Salesforce related stuff, because this framework, which is open source, is not related to Salesforce at all. So that is not available. There is also this recipes that is there. So those of you who are already working with recipes for LWC, there is a recipes for the open source version as well. Again, pure framework, nothing to do with Salesforce. So basic your reactive components, expressions, and all of it is present. So I'll leave it to you guys to explore more on all of this, but how do you get started? How do you use this open source version to start building your first app? For that, you navigate to the installation tab, where there are just 3 commands in order to build your first app using the open source version. So the first command is npx create LWC app my app. Basically, create LWC app is a tool that creates the basic scaffolding of your entire project. So very similar to, let's say you create your first SFDX project, you just write one command, SFDX force project create, and it creates this whole project structure for you. In a very similar way, for the open source version, you run this command. And we are going to look at it right now. So this command is going to take a bit of time to run, which is why I have posted screenshots, but feel free to run this command. It's going to take roughly 5 minutes to create your first app. So once you run this command and give your app name, it is going to basically ask you a bunch of questions. And these questions involve what is the package manager that you want to use. So all of it for people who are very new to Node.js and how it works. It might seem very new. It was new to me as well when I started working with OSS, because all of my career was just on pure Salesforce. So basically with Node, there is this package manager that you get. You can either use NPM or Yarn. You can select those. And using this tool, you can create PWS as well. You can choose to create a normal web app or a progressive web app. And bundlers, we spoke about the build tool. You can either use Webpack or any other tool of your choice. You can select which one you want to use. JavaScript or TypeScript. And finally, the most important question for today is, do you want to use a basic Express API server? Basically, what it says is LWC essentially is a front-end framework. And this tool allows you to create a Node.js server as well. And typically Express server is the most widely used server for Node. And this tool allows you to create a backend server for your front-end framework. So that is what this yes command tells you. You're going to be working a lot with Express server today. Now, this is all the first question. If you look at it, it says, do you want to use simple setup? And I selected no. So this is all of the options that you get. But in case you decide I want to use a simple setup, I'm not so well versed into Node. So you just select simple setup. You just give your app a name. You select if it's a PWA or not, and then you select if it is an Express server configuration. Now that is one option. The other one is even simpler way. Right inside the command, you can put the parameters, that is -yes and -o express. Basically what this says is -yes says don't show me the wizard, do everything on your own. And -o express says that please create an Express server for my code. That is what this says. And now let's look at the project structure that gets created. So the moment you run that command, it takes 5 minutes and then it creates this project structure. Inside which all of it is completely like Node.js based. So it contains an SRC folder, inside which there are 2 folders, client and server. So because you have selected the Express configuration, it's going to create a server folder, and all of your client files are going to be in the client folder. Inside the client, you have index.html and index.js, pretty much your standard web application standards. Everything is based on index.html. And here is where all of your Lightning Web Components are going to live, in the modules folder. So similar to your Lightning Web Components on platform, the folder structure is going to be replicated as I go inside. So inside the modules, you have this my folder, inside which you have your web components. Now we have named the folder my because it is your own namespace. Inside Salesforce, you don't typically create a folder called C, because C is the default namespace. So here all of your web components can be grouped into different folders. So essentially, because this is a local project built on Node.js, you can feel free to tweak it however you want. I can call it Aditya as well as folder. And inside that are my web components. So the web component structure is the same. If you look at it, there is a high level folder. It has the HTML file, which has the template tag. It has a file, which has your same import and export statements. And it has your CSS file. What this is missing is going to be your meta file, because meta file is something that is very specific to Salesforce. It is not going to be here. So that is the basic folder structure. As and when you work with it, you will get more familiar with it. Now coming to the server, there is a single file called api.js. We'll get into more of this in just a bit. but just know that all of your server configuration lives in the set. So this is your basic folder structure. And let's see what is the next slide. Yeah, it was code walkthrough, which I already gave. Now, coming to the high-level architecture. So you created a basic Lightning Web Components project locally. Like I mentioned, you can use any data source of your choice. But now, how do you talk to Salesforce? For all practical purposes, this is an external integration because this is an app that is outside Salesforce. So the only way you can talk to Salesforce from outside it is through integration and through APIs. So for that, you can directly use the browser and you can call Salesforce APIs because there are certain features, certain OAuth mechanisms that let you just use client-side JavaScript in order to talk to the Salesforce APIs. As you see, you're not using any middleware here. So this configuration is going to work even if you don't have the Express server created. Now, how do you achieve this? You achieve this using the OAuth user agent flow. So basically, it is a little bit of a architect level topic if you talk about authentication options and stuff, but let me simplify it for you. So whenever you're trying to talk from just JavaScript to Salesforce, you'll have to use this flow. Basically, what this flow says is that you direct the users to an endpoint, the user logs in, and then Salesforce is going to send back an access token to your app. So that is how the integration works. This uses client-side JavaScript only, like I said, no server, no middleware, and it doesn't involve the client secret. So there is this whole thing about client ID and client secret when you get into integrating with OAuth. This doesn't need all of that. Now, the best use cases for this kind of a flow is when you're building a mobile app which has an embedded browser. So the best example is your Salesforce mobile app. You launch your Salesforce mobile app and you say login. It actually runs the user agent flow in the backend. So it takes you to the Salesforce login page, you enter your credentials, and you come back to the app. And the app continues to work. So that is how it happens. So I think there is a code walkthrough after this. So let's look at the code. Like I said, it's going to be very simple. Don't worry too much about it. So this is the app.html file. What I'm going to do first is I've shown you the folder structure, but how do you run this app and check the output? For that, there is this command called npm run watch, which you run. What it does is it creates a local dev server for you using Webpack, and it opens up the thing in the local host. The advantage with local development is that any changes that you make here in the source code are automatically reflected in your browser on refresh. So it completes the build process, takes like 5 to 10 seconds. Hopefully it should work. And the local server is listening to 3001. So let's go to my browser and let's refresh 3001. And it's going to show you the output. Essentially, you have seen the app.html, the app web component. That is what is going to run here in some time. Okay, so while it runs, I'll start making the changes. So if you can see, this basically contains an image, it contains some text, and it contains a hyperlink. Now, how do you run the OAuth user agent flow? For that, it is very simple. You just redirect the users to a hyperlink. And the best way to redirect is using the anchor tag or the button, your wish. So the syntax is pretty simple. You redirect them to the OAuth authorized endpoint. You pass in the client ID of the connected app. You pass in the redirect URI. That means after completing login, where the user has to come back to. That means they have to come back to our own app. So you give the redirect URI. And if you want to pass in any state parameters, you send that. And I just save. And here it seems to automatically reload. And you'll see that the new login button has come. Now notice the URL is localhost 3001. That means it is running on my system. And in the redirect URI, I'm saying that after the authentication is complete, it has to come back to the same localhost 3001. So let's see. I click on login. it takes me to the Salesforce login page. Because I'm already logged in, it asks me if I want to allow access. And if I allow access, it's going to get me back to 3001. But now notice what happens in the URL. There is this whole access token that is embedded right inside the URL that you can continue to use. Now, the only problem with this is that because this access token is embedded in the URL, it is visible to all the users. So there are certain considerations that you'll have to take to remove it from the URL and stuff, which is why this is only meant for use in mobile apps where there is an embedded browser, where users don't really see the URL. And don't use it in this case, because I can easily copy this. People can look at my browser history and then get the access token. Not really secure in the context of a web app, but in the case of a mobile app with an embedded browser, this is more useful. So this is how the flow works, pretty simple. And once you have the access token, you can call any Salesforce API and get the data. Now, that is how you would do it with the front-end code only, but it is not really a best practice for Lightning Web Components, open source. So we are going to look at how you can do it with a middleware, because a middleware is always helpful because it abstracts all of this logic from the front end, and all of the logic goes into your server. So for that, like I said, you're creating an Express middleware already with the scaffolding tool. So this middleware is going to have the Express server configuration. From your browser, that is from your front-end Lightning Web Components code, you're going to make a request to the middleware. The middleware is then going to talk to Salesforce using the Salesforce APIs. So that is how this architecture works. And this is something that you can host on any of the services of your choice. So this is the high-level architecture with middleware. Now, what is the authentication options that you have when you deal with this? So the authentication option, the first thing you have is SOAP login. The best example for SOAP login is, let's say, your data loader. Whenever you try to log into Salesforce, it technically uses, I think so, it uses the SOAP login in the backend, so that it asks you for your credentials. You give your credentials, and then SOAP login happens at the backend. Data loader gets its own access token, and then it continues to work. It might either be using that or your user agent flow, but SOAP is one of the ways. But the thing here is it needs a server, of course, because you can't run this purely from a JavaScript, front-end JavaScript. You don't really need OAuth client info because you just need your username and password. And this is best used for websites with a single integration user. So essentially, you're going to hard code your username and password inside the code. So it would really mean whenever you're developing a website which integrates with Salesforce using a single integration user, you can use this flow. Now, for that, let's do a code walkthrough. Right now, I'm in my basic app, so let me remove this, and localhost 3001 is running with my code. Now we have pasted all of this. This is no longer needed. Let's just get it off. Now, this is your basic project, is what I was showing you. And let's collapse the client and let's go to the server and talk a little bit of what the API.js contains. So API.js is an Express implementation. So it has all of this is pre-written code, boilerplate code. You need not worry about all of this. Let all of it be. What you need to focus on is line number 13. So app.get /API/v1/endpoint. And then there is a request response, and then there is a response that you're sending. So with Express.js, this is how you would create an endpoint. So you would specify the name of the endpoint, and once users come to this endpoint, what is it that you want to do inside the endpoint is the logic, and finally, what is the result that you want to send. So here I've created an endpoint called API v1 endpoint. Of course, this is boilerplate. We are going to modify this. So you have this API, it's going to return a JSON success true. So let's copy this and go to our local host and paste it here. So localhost 3001/API/v1/endpoint. And once I go to that, you'll see it is returning success is equal to 2. So what this really does, your Express server is creating this endpoint which you can use from your browser as well. If you can use something from the browser, you can use it from your client-side JS. We are going to look at all of that in the example, which is how do you do it with the SOAP API. So pretty simple. Again, this is the SOAP API project. By the way, I went to a different project, and this is the api.js file. And what you'll notice here at first is we are using the JS-Force library. So Node has a vast number of libraries for any task that you can imagine. That is why Node is gaining a lot of traction, and which is why all of us are excited about Salesforce Evergreen. Now you're going to use JS-Force as a library. You're going to import the library, and you're also going to use something called as a .env. What this basically says is your configuration file. In Node.js, .env is basically your configuration file where you specify your username, password, and all of it. And you can change these for different environments, just like you have custom labels in Salesforce. Imagine that environment variables in Node.js. You use both of these files. And what I do here, I get the environment variables. I check if all of them exist or not. And once they exist, this is again boilerplate JS-Force code. So what you do, you create a new JS-Force connection. You specify what is the login URL. It can be a sandbox, production, my domain. Then you send in the username, password, and optionally your Salesforce token. Because this is not using OAuth, it is just a SOAP API login. It adheres to all of your profile-based settings like login IP ranges and stuff. So make sure to pass the SF token, and you just need to call this code and the connection is established. And here you'll see again app.get/API/sessions, which is a new endpoint that I've created. And inside that, I'm making a call to an SOQL query. So this is the SOQL query, and I'm running a query, connection.query. All of these, don't worry too much. All of this is documented very well in JS-Force. So you're going to use all of that. A bunch of different formatting, of course, your own business logic, and finally you send the data. So this is how it's going to work, and with the basic username and password authentication. And if you want to look at the output, let's go to this. This is actually the output of the code that I've shown you, which is the Lightning Conference app that we have built with all of that logic. What you'll see is all of these sessions are coming from Salesforce, and notice I haven't supplied any credentials because the backend is using the username and password to go and fetch those credentials. So that is one of the flows. The next one is the OAuth web server flow. Right now, you have seen the flow in which you're sort of hard coding your username and password, but the web server flow is a pure OAuth based implementation where your implementation can vary based on end users' credentials, which means this entire flow requires that a user logs in explicitly from the front end. And it needs a server, and the server needs to protect the client secret. I'm not going to go into deep, but yeah, it needs to protect the client secret. And this is best used for websites needing per user authentication. So let's say you log into Amazon.com and you see your own cart, you see your own shopping items. So the logic, the UI is based, the data is based on your own user. In that case, you need to authenticate it on a per user basis, which is why you go to this flow. Here also, it involves directing the users to a Salesforce endpoint. The users log in, they approve access, all of it same until then. But what happens is the callback doesn't include the access token. It only includes an authorization code. You again send that code to a different endpoint and get the access token back. That is the authentication flow. You'll need to learn more about it. If people already know about it, it is good. But yeah, that is what it is about. And the code walkthrough for that is going to get a little bit complicated because here we'll have to create a lot of endpoints. Before that, let me quickly stop the locals over here. Okay, so here again, the same api.js, the same JS-Force, but look at what we are doing a little bit to the bottom. So here, previously we initialized JS-Force with just the username and password. But here we are initializing it with the client ID, client secret, and the callback URL. So you do that. And then what you also do is you enable server-side sessions. That is because if you navigate from one page to the other, you don't want to recall all of this logic. You want to have a session stored in the backend as well. Again, pretty much a Node.js implementation. I was also equally confused when I first learned about it, so chill. Here, what you'll see is we are exposing many other endpoints as well. So previously, we only exposed one endpoint which fetched the data for us. But in this flow, you'll first have to redirect the users to one endpoint. They come back to your website, and then you make a call out to a different endpoint in Salesforce to get your access token. So for that, I create one endpoint called OAuth login, which essentially does a redirect to the Salesforce endpoint. And once it comes back to the OAuth callback endpoint. So this is another endpoint that I'm exposing, which in turn fetches the access token based on the authorization port. And what I do here is I create one other endpoint which says OAuth2/who am I. Essentially what it means, if you want to get the logged in details of the user, OAuth exposes this endpoint for getting the logged in user details. You do that. And then you also expose something for logout. So let us quickly run this and see how you do it. So more than the code, what I want to focus on, this code is always available to you guys. I'm going to share a link at the end. But the intention of showing all of these different options is we have looked at the username and password option, which is meant for a single integration user. Now we are looking at the web server flow, which again looks at per user authorization. We've also looked at how do you access it from the client side. And we told you that it is not really a best practice in the case of web apps because you can see the access token in the client side. So this new app that I'm running with the OAuth web server flow, it's going to have a login button, obviously, because you first need to log in order to look at the flow. So let's give it 1 or 2 seconds. I have no clue why it is so slow. Okay, so please log in with your Salesforce account. So what you'll see is once I click on this, it goes to localhost 3001/OAuth2/login, which appears on the bottom of my screen. So I make a call to that endpoint, again goes to Salesforce, comes back. In the backend, it calls the callback API and it shows me the data. And when I click on logout, it goes to OAuth2/logout and comes back. So this is really a best practice is what I can say on how you can access Salesforce data. Please use the web server flow as much as possible for per user authentication. Now coming to the other flow, that is the JWT bearer flow. So the first thing that you saw when you needed a single integration user was SOAP API. But the drawback with that, even though you can use a single integration user, you're essentially like hard coding or putting your username and password in a text file or a configurable environment variable, which is again not tamper proof, which is why you'll have to do the JWT bearer flow, where essentially you create a JSON web token. There is a bit of a logic for that to do. But what it does is you create a JWT, you send that JWT to the endpoint, and then it gives you the access token back. And we use certificates and all to establish trust between two servers. So basically, this is the recommended flow. Some of you might already be using this flow where OAuth also has a username and password based flow. Again, the same problem where you send the username and password to an endpoint. Again, not really secure because your username and password is transmitted on the network. So basically, the recommendation is a single integration user. Use SOAP API if you're absolutely sure that your implementation is tamper proof. But JWT bearer flow in all the other cases because it is more trusted. Now coming to data residency. So you've looked at all the other authentication options. All of these options invoke the Salesforce APIs. And when you access data from Salesforce, it is bound by the Salesforce security policies like your profiles, roles, permission sets, and all of those. And you have real-time access to data. You make a call out to the endpoint, you get the data back. But whenever you're deploying these apps onto third-party services like Heroku, AWS, you also might want to read data from within those instances. So let's say Heroku has their own Postgres database, or AWS has their own S3 instance, or wherever your data is present. So you can access data that is present inside there as well. And how do you get Salesforce data replicated locally into your databases inside these hosted instances? Is by using connectors that these services provide. For example, Heroku provides Heroku Connect, which actually near real time replicates all of your Salesforce data into a local database. And you can continue accessing the local data from Lightning Web Components. Now, the only drawback with that is once the data is replicated into your custom database, it doesn't respect your sharing model any longer. So you'll have to ensure your sharing model and all is appropriately configured. These are some of the considerations. Feel free to take a screenshot. I'm not going to dive very deep, but when do you use APIs versus when can you go with connectors? These are some of the considerations. For example, if you always want real-time data, connectors might not be an option because maybe it takes 10 minutes for it to refresh data. So your data is not going to be real-time. So all of those, please take it into consideration when deciding between the connectors and Pro APIs. Now, again, one of the final code bases to access
Time
your
check.
local data.
Another 3 minutes to go.
Yeah, I'm almost done. So here, again, it is all Node.js code. So instead of importing JSForce, you're going to require a Postgres library. And again, you're going to connect to the Postgres library. The syntax should already feel familiar. So instead of passing your Salesforce username or Salesforce client ID, client secret, you just pass in the database URL and you run a simple query. So the code pretty much is going to look the same almost always. It's just that you need to know what are the libraries that you need to import. So best practices, never ever write your business logic on front-end JavaScript code. So any of the logic that deals with authentication, which is why if you remember the very first flow that I showed you, the access token coming in the JavaScript URL, in your browser URL, not really recommended because you don't want to expose anything that is sensitive to the front end. So always, always, always use a middleware in order to write all your sensitive logic, particularly when dealing with authentication. Again, yes, your middleware, it can be either Express server that comes as a part of the scaffolding tool, but you can also choose to use MuleSoft or any other ESB of your choice. With that, yes, further learning, I know it was a very quick session because authentication in itself is a complex topic. So this is a trail mix that I've created for all of you guys. Feel free to take a look at it, where I included all of the resources and most importantly, sample code. So all of the code pieces that I've shown you is available on a GitHub repository inside this trail mix. You can use it as a boilerplate content in order for your integrations. You need not really worry about all of this logic that I've explained. Just use a boilerplate code and get it done. Again, developer resources. So in case you are interested in more content of what our developer relations team does, this is a wonderful place to go about it. Blog posts, podcasts, sample app gallery, any other webinars that we do, follow this, take a screenshot, follow this trail mix, which has all of the links that you need. Yeah, I think survey. Rupesh, is there any survey or do you want me to take questions? How is it? Or is there time?
So yeah. So there are a bunch of questions that are already put up.
Okay. What is the best way to ensure testing and quality of LWC components? Use Jest framework to write your tests, which run locally and they test your web components. How is it different from the React framework that is already there? Our framework is completely based on web standards and it is evolving based on whatever are the new developments being made on the web standards. It is right now, the runtime is only 7 KB, one of the lightest frameworks available. What is the best use case where we can use LWC open source? So anywhere you want to create. So I don't know if you've been following the campaigns that we run. So the Level Up SF Dev campaign that we run, there is a website that you go to it. I built that website completely on Heroku and Lightning Web Components. So whenever you try to deploy apps on external platforms, you will have to choose a front-end framework that can be React, Vue, or Lightning Web Components. The best case, because you're a Salesforce developer, you're already familiar with LWC, you can directly start using LWC and use it on other platforms as well. I'm an admin trying to learn LWC, which is the best place to start. I've started on Trailhead and looking for other supportive resources. Trailhead is a really good content, but I would also recommend going through YouTube because there are a bunch of quick start videos done by either my team or Christoph. There are a bunch of videos on that, really good content. That question is already answered. So for integration, there is no need of a connected app. It depends if you're using OAuth, you need a connected app, but if you're just using the SOAP API to log in, you don't really need a connected app. Is it possible to use OAuth JWT instead of user flow in authentication? Yes, user flow. If it involves a hard-coded username and password, then yes, JWT. JWT cannot be used for a per-user authentication because when creating the JWT token, you actually send in the username of the user that you want to log them in as well. Okay, just scrolled all the way down. What does a middleware actually do? It actually abstracts your logic from the front end. So what you've seen is if you write all the logic in the front end, I can do inspect element on the browser and I can look at all of your JavaScript code. And in case your code contains hard-coded username, passwords, or queries, I can modify the queries in the front end and get the results back. So instead of that, I'm abstracting all of those details by using a middleware. Okay, what others are there? Isn't it recommended to use REST over SOAP? Yes, that is totally up to you. Whenever you're dealing with web applications, REST is recommended because it is more lightweight. But the JSForce library gives us the ability to do SOAP requests as well. That is why I've shown you that. And as a matter of fact, there is a Trailhead project as well on accessing Salesforce data. It also uses the SOAP API login from JSForce. How is Express Server different from local server? Are they both the same? So Express Server can run on the cloud as well. Local server is just a local implementation of all of it. So localhost 3001, it actually runs the Express Server code. But if you deploy it to Heroku, you would actually use the Heroku endpoint. Okay, a lot of questions are pouring in actually. How to implement select on lightning checkbox group. Base components are not there in the open source version. Any Salesforce related questions, please take it to the forums. Will you share in GitHub all these examples? I've shared the web server flow with you in the examples. The SOAP API flow is shared with you in the Trailhead project. The JWT token is currently not available. I'm working on putting it on GitHub. Is there API consumption counted when you connect? Yes, definitely. It is counted. But if you use Heroku Connect, it doesn't count. It again depends on the connector's contract with Salesforce.
All right. So Aditya, in the interest of time,
okay,
we'll take another two questions, and the pending questions we can answer it in offline mode.
All right. So I think all of the questions are answered. The only question is, when we go with Heroku Connect, how do we respect sharing? I'm afraid it's going to be a completely custom implementation on your end because Salesforce is the one doing all the sharing implementation in runtime. But if you're using Heroku Connect, when the data comes into your Heroku Postgres, you will have to write your own logic. So with that, I think in the interest of time, I will wrap it up. But if you remember my credentials, please reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to answer all of your questions.
Yeah, so just one last comment around how to learn about all these four flows which were shown. There are multiple videos out there on YouTube, and there are also articles available on Google as well. So feel free to find them. I know there are some great content produced by Ladies Be Architects as well around if you're preparing for identity and access management designer exams. All of these concepts are clear, are explained in detail on some of those YouTube videos.
Yeah, this topic is fairly for intermediate level participants. So I'm sorry if beginners are not able to follow it completely, but yeah, you will catch it on. It is not so difficult.
All right. Thanks a lot, Aditya, for your time. It was a great session. And thank you, audience, for all of your questions. I'll pass over the question transcript to Aditya in case if there's anything which has been missed out. And you can always reach out to him on Twitter and on his LinkedIn channel so that he can provide answers to your queries.
Sure. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Have a great week ahead.
Thank you.